Thank you. You know, this is a very goofy situation for me. Usually I come out and I'm trying to convince people with a heavy liberal leaning that the free market and freedom is an okay idea and kind of pushing for liberty. And I don't think I have to do that at all tonight. All my kind of prepared remarks are kind of useless here or redundant or something. So I'm going to be talking about something a little bit different. And that's I'm going to be talking about how I hope that you people, as you win, and you are going to win, freedom will win, there's no doubt about that, liberty will win. You're going to win, you're going to have control, and we're going to have a much freer country and a freer world. There's no doubt about that. And I'm just here to give you a plea, to kind of beg you that as you win and as you have the power, please don't forget the nuts, the whack jobs, the crazies, the losers, because we really need you. You know, as I sat there and listened to people talking about going to Yale and talking about being a Marine pilot, honored with all sorts of medals, and this cat stands here on stage and says he doesn't think he deserves to be on this stage in front of y'all. And I'm sitting there in that seat thinking, oh yeah, and I'm going to follow him. And my background is I am cheap, carny trash. She was not able to list the awards that he won. She was not able to, without looking at her notes, to see the numbers of the helicopter that he knew how to pilot. I learned how to juggle, and I got out of high school on a plea bargain. And I am here to tell you that for 30 years, I have been pushing like crazy for free market and libertarian ideas. And all of a sudden, people that look like this are on board. I mean, I've been in little rooms back, you know, when Harry Brown, you know, was running for president, and Doug Stanhope and real people who nobody listened to were trying to do stuff like that in little rooms with a bunch of geeks. And they did not have this kind of muscle, and they did not have the zeitgeist that you cats are surfing on. And you really are surfing on it, and you really are going to get all the power. And please, don't forget the people who agree with you but have the word nut after what they agree with you about. Because I am not a big L libertarian and I am not a little L libertarian. I am part of a compound word libertarian. I am a libertarian nut. I am a whack job, I am a crazy. And I will guarantee you there's all sorts of stuff that I believe so deeply in my heart that you cannot stand it, that someone in this room disagrees with. And I will add to that the person that disagrees with me is probably right. But I want you to remember, as you take over the country and have all the power and all that muscle that comes in, I want you to remember people like me who really need you. The creeps, the freaks, the nuts. And I will tell you now how much of a nut I am, because some of you might not know. I am such a nut that I went on politically incorrect the first week it was on, back when it was on like whatever it was, Comedy Channel or HAR, or one of those things. The first week Politically Incorrect was on, and I'm the only guest who was on the first week and the last week of Politically Incorrect when it was over on ABC. Wasn't Glenn ever on ABC? I did the first week and the last week. I was sitting there with Bill Maher. And there's a moment that I found that really was a kind of self-awareness that kind of flipped me out. I went out on Politically Incorrect. I guess it was on a couple dozen times. And this was probably time number 10 or so. I'm not even sure he'd moved to ABC yet. And I was sitting out there, and Bill Maher had come out to look over his cards and do a mic check. And I was sitting there for some reason a little bit early. I don't know why I was out there and the other guests weren't. But I was sitting there in the chair and kind of getting comfortable and collecting my thoughts. And on each of the other chairs, the other three people, one here, two across from me, and then Bill over here, there were name tags. And the name tag said who was going to be on. And I remember the exact details of who it was. But one of the place markers, said that it was like the drug czar for whoever happened to be president then. And the other one was someone who was a lawyer with the ACLU or something. And the third person was an actor who had spoken a lot and kind of heavy political activist, kind of real guest, and I looked over to Bill, who I'd known for years, and I said, it's funny because you usually have a nut chair. You usually have someone on the show who's just a nut, who just says anything that pops into their heads, and that the other people kind of play off. And it seems like these guests here tonight, they're all kind of legit. It doesn't seem like... And then it struck me that if you're sitting at a poker table and you don't know who the fish is, it's because you're the fish. And as Bill sat there and kind of smiled and nodded and winked, I realized that even to Bill Maher, I was a nut. Bill Maher had gotten himself into this I'm a stand-up, I'm a political comedian, but I was the nut in the nut chair, talking about freedom and liberty for everybody. Now, John, we were talking about this gig a while ago and talking about it this afternoon, really did kind of hint to me that we should, not hint to me, he told me outright, that we should slow play the fact that I'm an atheist. And I thought about that a little bit, and I decided that I would slow play it. And then John said it before the introduction even started. You drew first blood. I can talk about the fact that I'm an atheist. And he said that before the invocation, the Eisenhower quotation. So I listened to the invocation very, very, very carefully. And I just tried to find something provocative, something I could disagree with, something that I could say, those of you who are people of faith and believers believe stuff that's in the invocation. And me, on the other side, the atheist, the outsider, the nut, the creep, the whack job, I believe something different. And I listened carefully, and every single word rang true. Because the words in that invocation, the words that Eisenhower gave, were inclusive. They were the words that protect the nuts, that protect the whack jobs, that protect the people who are saying things before anybody wants to hear that. It talks about accepting the right of everybody to worship or not worship the way that they choose. And there is nothing more beautiful about America than the fact that we don't agree. And when you get each individual in this country we don't agree on anything. And if you look at a totalitarian government, they don't care very much what you believe as long as you all believe it together. What they worship, what they love is homogeneity. They want everybody to be absolutely as close to the same as possible. If a nail is sticking up, they want to hammer it down. And I think it's really important to remember, when you are in screaming matches with someone you disagree with on a point that actually is vital, actually is life and death, actually is right and wrong, that person you are screaming at is someone you must love and respect. And I learned a very, very important lesson. I did a show on Showtime, which I guess I'm not going to spend all evening trying to avoid the title. So I'll just say it right now, so get ready. The name of the show was Penn and Teller Bullshit. I did that show for 8 years. And I must confess, the title was my idea. I fought for the title. I argued for the title. I won, and I was wrong. Because as we became the longest running show in Showtime history, we still couldn't get a bullshit billboard. We couldn't get any bullshit ads. We couldn't get any bullshit promos, except in the evening during their other bullshit shows. Boy, if I had only called it Penn and Teller's Skeptic Parade. But you know, I pitched that show 2 weeks after 9/11. Right when President Bush told us that the best way to fight this act of terrorism was to go back to doing exactly what we always did. And man, it was hard. It was hard for everybody. And I'm not claiming that I'm even in the top 90% of people that had it difficult after that terrorism attack. But for those of us on Easy Street, those of us in show business, it was really tough to go into rooms and say that I wanted to do a skeptical show, that I wanted to do a show that would bust people who believed in things fervently. It was a very, very hard pitch to do. And I was pitching something that I think John touched upon a little bit that is really, really important. And that is that the side of the left, the side that show business mostly takes it because the crazy people have passion. And if you aren't particularly talented in putting together television or putting together radio or putting together any form of art, passion is the reason we live. It's all we live for. And a lot of times I'll watch people on my side, people who are pro-science and do not believe in the paranormal or the supernatural, arguing with somebody on the other side who believes that UFOs visited them in the backyard, or that they can bend spoons with their minds, or they can read minds, or that their cat can talk to somebody, or there's stigmata on a statue in their backyard. And every time I've watched one of those, the person who is wrong is always more interesting. The person who is wrong always has more passion. And it's because those of us who are cheerleaders for, I don't need to tell you this, but I'm not a scientist. But I'm a cheerleader for scientists. I am someone who loves science and wants to go with an objective scientific principle. And when we have someone speaking from that point of view, They try to do what they do to learn, and what scientists in the past 300 years have done, which is follow the scientific method. So the whack jobs, the crazy people, the ones who are wrong, speak in these beautiful absolutes. They sound like beat poets. They sound like Allen Ginsberg. They sound like Bob Dylan. They sound with all this beauty. They get answered by someone who is calculated and measured and very, very careful. And when I pitched to Showtime, we actually pitched to a lot of people who turned it down, but Showtime hired us. When I pitched to Showtime, I said, what we will try to do with bullshit is to be correct, but have the passion of a nut. I want to have, there's a wonderful quotation about one heart reaching out to another heart without the brain in between, which I hadn't heard before. It's very, very clever and very, very witty, but you have to be very careful that you still keep your heart in the equation. And your heart has to be crazy and wild and out of its mind. And you can still be correct, but you've got to yell, and you've got to cry, and you've got to scream, and you've got to say stuff that's half-assed. You've got to go off half-cocked, and you have to be wrong. Because that is the thing that shows people you are human. And you have got to be crazier than a shithouse rat. And what I tried to give with all my heart and all my soul and my mind was to research these topics as carefully as I could, lay everything out with our researchers, make sure that our position was as close to correct as we could possibly get it. And we did 8 years. And we did a lot of shows, 80-something shows. And we were wrong on a lot of stuff. Time showed us wrong, and there's other stuff we were just wrong at the time that now I realize that. And there's other stuff we were wrong at the time that I haven't realized yet. I know that. But then I tried to put all that aside and go out there like a whack job. Like just the craziest person you'd ever seen, because I wanted to show people that after I'd done the research, I still had my heart, and I still had the passion, and I still had the crazy. And that is the hardest thing you can do in life and in art and in show business, is to have the visceral and the intellectual collide as fast as they possibly can. That is the reason we are alive. We are alive because when we're riding that roller coaster, our mind, our heart, our viscera, our guts tell us on that roller coaster that we are going to die, and fills us with fear. And our mind tells us, if they killed every person that went on this roller coaster, wouldn't their insurance rates be too high to stay open? And when those two things collide at 100 miles an hour down a dead-end street, that's when you become human. That's when you have beauty. And the colliding of the visceral and the intellectual is what all of life is about. And it's not only art, it's not only comedy, but it's also sex, it's also food, it's also driving your car, it's also falling in love. It is everything in our lives to have the crazy and the intellectual work together. But I did something else on bullshit during the pitch. And that is, I became cynical. And cynical to me is the worst thing you can be. I'm kind of an odd comedian because I do not like satire, and I do not like irony, and I do not like cynicism. Bill Maher brags about his cynicism. He brags about seeing the worst in people. And every time he does that, it breaks my heart. Because it'll always give you a good laugh, and it'll always make you seem smart. Always. The cynic always looks smart. but the cynic never looks beautiful. And you need to have both smart and beautiful. But when I was pitching bullshit, because I was trying to look grown up, and the cynic always looks grown up. You always look grown up saying that everybody's doing the worst and the world's getting worse and saying all that stuff, which, by the way, is patently not true. The world is getting better. Two things have been true for the past 15,000 years. And that is, things are always getting better, and people always say they're getting worse. And that is not some sort of crazy, cockeyed optimist saying that. I can prove it. Fewer people die, fewer people suffer, fewer people are in misery. Things are just getting better. But during that pitch, and I'm scared, when you go into pitch, you're terrified. You're sitting in a room with people and you're trying to tell them that something you have in your heart that's beautiful should go on TV. And they're there to tell you that it won't make money, it shouldn't go. So I said to them that it didn't matter whether people watched because they agreed with us or they disagreed with us, as long as they watched. And that we would get a lot of hate mail, an awful lot of hate mail, but that would be okay, because we would be doing controversy. So I started to sell the show with a certain kind of steely hate in my heart. I was selling the show as a cynic, saying, we don't care what they think of us as long as we get their money. And I'm so ashamed of that. I'm so ashamed of that. Because then we went and we started doing the show. And our first show was about talking to the dead, the John Edward type stuff. It was a very difficult, obviously you can talk to the dead. They just don't answer you. But these people say they answer you. And man, it was a really, really hard show for me. A really hard show. Because my mom had just died. And I'm a mama's boy. There's something very, very trendy and very popular, especially among comedians, where you're supposed to brag about the fact that you're from a dysfunctional family and you're supposed to complain about your parents. I was treated perfectly by my parents. My parents are still the two biggest heroes I have in my life. They're both dead now. And I was very, very, see, you've got to get organized faster. Because I said my parents were heroes to me. And no, don't. And then I said they're both dead now. And that's when you applauded. But I understand the sentiment, and thank you very much for that. But, and I've always been a big fan of Houdini. And when before my mom and dad died, I was very much against people who prey upon the suffering of others by doing cheap magic tricks and saying that they are supernaturally in touch with the people. And I'd spoken a lot about how the most valuable thing I have in my life is the memories of my mom and dad. There's nothing else. I have my children, but they're still here. But the memories of my mom and dad mean everything to me. And what is often taken out of the debate about people who say that saying they're talking to the dead and saying that they're communicating with loved ones is not they're being ripped off for money. Who cares? It's not that much money. It's not that they're being lied to about science, because a lot of people are lied to about science. We're used to being wrong about that. The sin of what they're doing is they are changing the memory of someone we love that's died. Which means if I went to a psychic or someone who was claiming to speak to the dead, And they said they were talking to my mother. And this is what Mom said. They would have given me a piece of information about my mother that was not true. And they would have taken the deepest, most important thing to me, which is being able to picture as much as I can of what she said to me. And I'm saying she because my mom died later. I was just as close to my dad, and I always feel a little guilty when I talk too much about my mom because both of my parents were wonderful. They are taking the memory that I have in my heart of one of the most important people in my life, and they are distorting it a little bit. And for that, if there is a hell, may they rot in it. There's nothing you can do worse than destroy the love in someone's heart. So the first show I did of bullshit was about talking to the dead. And there was a lot of passion on that set. And then later, we did shows about religion. I did a show about the Bible. And something amazing happened. And that is that I got myself ready for the hate mail. I got myself ready to get letters from a Christian nation. This is a Christian nation. Majority of the people in this country are Christian. And I got ready because the majority of Showtime subscribers are Christian. And I had attacked the Bible. I got ready in my cynical little heart to say that we would get a huge amount of hate mail from these people, and we should be happy because that was showing that they were at least watching the show. And then something happened that shames me even to this day. And the mail did flow in. And we got more mail than any other show on Showtime. And most of the mail was from Christians, because that's what it would be, right? Statistically, most people watching are Christians. Most of the people writing are Christians. And almost all of it was positive. And almost all of it was loving. And almost all of it said stuff like, you know, I don't agree with your point of view. I hope you find Jesus as your personal Savior. I hope you go to heaven. And I love you. And I hope you're seeing the truth. But boy, you know, your show was really funny. And you presented your points of view with passion and with dignity. And the naked people you had on your show were pretty sexy too. I hope you find Jesus. I'm praying for you. But I loved Penn and Teller's bullshit, and keep it up. Yeah. And letters poured in like that over the full 8 years. Almost everyone that we trashed came in and said, you know, I really, really like the fact that you're making a point with passion and in this forum, but I think you're wrong. Now, I say almost everybody. Chiropractors, 9/11 truthers still want me dead. But other people seem to be pretty cool. So I had to change my whole point of view and take that little bit of cynicism and snuff it out. In the 1980s, I was pretty much a standard liberal, I suppose. And then I met a man named Tim Jennison. And some of you may know a movie that we did called Tim's Vermeer, which is about, a few people, which is about Tim Jennison, who's an entrepreneur. He created New Tech. He still owns it himself. Very, very successful man, who decided that maybe Vermeer was actually taking photographs and not painting pictures. And maybe it was technology. And maybe he knew what this technology was, and he painted a Vermeer, the music lesson, in his garage in San Antonio. using the technique that he thought Vermeer might have used. And I don't know how good a movie it is. I made the movie, wouldn't be polite to say, but it certainly is an amazing story, and Tim was great. And Tim is really, really smart and really, really successful. And Tim is also really, really honest. And we got to be really close friends. And Tim started talking to me about my liberal points of view. And Tim was not manipulative. And this is, I think, one of the most important things. A lot of times you'll go to like-thinking people, and I speak to atheist groups, and I speak to skeptics groups, and I speak to a lot of people, libertarian groups, who want to change hearts and change minds. And they'll talk about, kind of in their closed little quarters, how do you manipulate someone into coming over to your point of view? How do you, and the tone is always to me, how do you swindle people into changing their minds? And the anti-UFO people will say, you know, you ask them, don't say you're wrong, say, can you think of any other set of circumstances that could explain what you saw as a UFO? And they don't ever say, just look the person in the eye and with dignity and respect say, you are wrong. And here's why. Because saying you are wrong shows respect. It shows you're an American. It shows you're part of the dialogue. And Tim Jennison said to me about my liberal points of view, he said, you are wrong. And I argued with him. And he kept saying, you are wrong. You are wrong. And then he said a sentence to me that changed everything. He asked me a question. And he said, do you think it's right to punish someone who has done nothing right? Something wrong, I'm sorry. Do you think it's right to punish someone who's done nothing wrong? And I said, of course, well, no. And he said, then why is it okay to reward someone who's done nothing right? And that point of view, that simple question and answer, that Socratic type dialogue there, really started me changing. And then he said another sentence, which is, if it's a good idea, the government probably shouldn't do it. It's a really profound idea. Because if we, in the Declaration of Independence, if our government comes from the consent of the people who are governed, then that means we're responsible for what government does. It's being done in our name. And the question is, if government has a monopoly on force, which I believe that's the definition of government, they have a monopoly on force. Everything government does is done at some level with the threat of a gun behind it. Now, when I speak to groups that aren't free market groups, I have to spend a lot of time explaining that government is violence. I'll skip over that whole section. So the question comes down to, and this is what changed me, the only things I can ask the government to do are the things that I myself would do if I had a gun and I knew justice. And the questions become very, very simple to me then. Because the question, would you use a gun to stop a murder? Well, you know, that's assuming I can tell that it's really a murder that's happening, which I'm not sure I can. I'm not sure I could tell that from vigorous CPR, but assuming I know that. And assuming I had a gun, which although I use it in our show and do a big bit on the Second Amendment, I don't actually carry. But assuming I had a gun, and assuming I'm not, that I weren't a coward, which I am, I'm not the one up here that's a decorated Marine helicopter pilot. Remember, I'm the one who's carny trash. Would I use a gun to stop a murder? Yes. Would I use a gun to stop a rape? Well, if I hadn't read about it in Rolling Stone, yes. Would I use a gun to protect personal property? Oh, man. Yeah, I would. Would I use a gun to build a library? I'm from a dead factory town in western Massachusetts, a poor town, Greenfield, Massachusetts. And I'm wicked old, 60 years old. I grew up before the internet. And I went to a terrible, terrible public school. But I've been 3 times redundant there. Terrible, terrible school. I didn't know jack. So I went to the library all the time. The library really, really mattered to me. The library is where I first read Kafka and Allen Ginsberg, because Frank Zappa told me to. It's where I first heard Stravinsky and Verez. It's where I first heard Alban Berg and Stockhausen. It's where I first learned about magic and juggling and religion, which for those of you who remember the Dewey Decimal System are all in the 900s. And man, I love that library. I got on my bike and I rode there all the time. Frank Zappa said, skip the senior prom and go to the library if you've got any guts. Precisely what I did. But would I use a gun to build a library? Well, you know, I'd put up my money to build a library. I'd beg you to put up money for a library. But would I point a gun at someone and say, we're taking your tax money to build a library? Would I do that? No, I wouldn't. And that to me is right where we go down the line. I love NASA. When Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, I cried so hard that I'm still crying now when I say Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. No, I wouldn't. That's got to be done privately. And you know, I like crazy, crazy art. I like art that I bet everybody in this room hates. There was an artist named David Warnerowitz who got his NEA grants pulled in the 80s because NEA grants pulled because his stuff was very anti-Catholic and very pro-gay. And they pulled the NEA money from him. And he was one of my favorite artists. And my reaction when he lost his NEA grant was I was living in New York at the time. I went to his studio and I bought a lot of his work because I figured he just lost his grant, needs money, probably be cheap. Would I use a gun for art? No, I wouldn't. I'd get rid of the NEA because now we have Kickstarter, Indiegogo. We don't need it. They're more efficient. They're more honest, and they don't use force. They don't use guns. We do not use guns. I don't care how unpopular this is. I listen to NPR. I like Terry Gross. I like all that stuff a lot. But man, the fact that it's done at gunpoint makes me sick. And I don't care if it's only 2% or 1%. Guns do not belong in art. And when Penn and Teller were asked to play a series at a show, a series at a theater that was all done with NEA grants, we wouldn't do it. Because our show is too goddamn good. And if I need to point a gun at you to get you to come to my show, I need to find a different job. So that's how I became a libertarian. And I became a libertarian nut. And I go on TV and I say things that are very, very unpopular. Like I say that I'm against gay marriage, and before anyone applauds at that, I follow that with, I'm against straight marriage. I don't know why the government gets involved in my love life. I love my wife and my children more than anything in the world. And the fact that the government got involved in that doesn't make it more sacred. It makes it obscene. And the only reason we're married is because I could not find a lawyer in Nevada who would promise me that if we signed a contract and dotted all our I's and crossed all our T's and spent a metric shit ton of money, they could guarantee that if something happened to my wife, I would get custody of our children if her family went crazy. And it wasn't clear that I could visit her in the hospital. So yes, I am against gay marriage and straight marriage, but until we can get rid of that and get the government out of that stuff, we gotta allow freedom for all people. And the people that I fight for the most, the people that I argue for the most, are the Westboro Baptist Church. Because they are nuts on the other side. And if I have any doubt about their right to say what they want to say, all I am doing is shutting myself up. And those of us who are atheists and are people that don't have faith, we are fighting for the rights of people who want to have faith, for people who want to believe, because that is what liberty is about. I have a very simple definition of liberty. Liberty is the freedom to be stupid. No one needs freedom to do the smart thing. We need freedom to be stupid. I have never had a drink of alcohol or a recreational drug in my life. Right now, that means I'm banned from Colorado. I did not inhale. I said, get that joint away from me, you stupid hippie. I was so afraid that if I had one toke of marijuana, I would want to listen to the Grateful Dead, and I couldn't bear that. I was so afraid that if I had a drink of alcohol, I would listen to Garth Brooks. So I stayed away from all that stuff. But I will not tell you right now, I cannot tell you that I think my life has had better choices than Jim Morrison, who died at 28 in the Doors. I don't know that it's better to live a life as long as I have so far, totally sober, than it is to do heroin and die really young. I don't know what's best for other people. And I want other people to have the right to be stupid. I want to fight for that freedom. And I stand here before you now, knowing that many of you do not agree with me, to beg you, as you grow in power, and as John and all the other wonderful people here tonight help you get your point across, please remember that there are nuts and whack jobs and creeps and freaks who disagree with you, but need you more than anything to fight for the right to be stupid and crazy. Thank you so much for letting a cheap carny trash come here. Thanks so much. Peace.